Greetings to you all. Today we're carrying out a special interview with Professor Quyen Quang Tran, who has just published a book entitled Physiognomy, the Art of Reading People. Greetings to you, Professor Tran.
Hello, I am Hoang Trong. First, let me thank you for inviting me to this interview. Please allow me to give you a little background information on myself. I graduated from the University of Science and Pedagogy. My first job was teaching mathematics at Hoang Trong Thuy School in South Vietnam. Then I taught business politics at Đà Lạt University after completing an MBA degree at Đà Lạt Political School of Business. Next, I worked for the National Economic Development Fund before going to the United States to attend a one-year postgraduate program in agro-industrial development and management. After that, I worked for World Bank for 25 years before retiring in 2001.
Many of your friends are probably very familiar with your activities in Vietnam and here in the U.S. It sounds like you're very much into mathematics, finance, and teaching. Can you tell us what prompted you to write a book on the art of physiognomy reading?
I went through a lot of hardship in my younger days. This made me wonder about destiny and more specifically about whether or not man can change his fate. I invested considerable time and energy reading books on face reading. Then a great opportunity arose when I met Mr. Ngo Hung Dinh, who was the foremost physiognomist in Vietnam. I studied with him for 9 years. After his death, I decided to write down everything I learned from him during the 9 years in order to honor him and to pass on his unique knowledge of physiognomy. My goal with this book is to lay down the fundamental building blocks upon which the art of Vietnamese physiognomy reading can be built.
The title of the book is Physiognomy, the Art of Reading People. I remember when I was young I often heard my parents and others mention Mr. Ngo Hung Dinh. Can you tell our viewers about him?
Mr. Dinh was indisputably the greatest physiognomist of his time in Vietnam. He brought this art to the Vietnamese people, reading the future for them in their language. He was born in Quang Yên to a family who followed Confucianism. After obtaining a high school diploma, he worked for a bank and later for a shell company, until the Japanese took over Vietnam from the French. He then decided to travel across the country to help people with his knowledge of physiognomy and feng shui.
Can you tell us how Mr. Ngo Hung Dinh took you under his wings? The reason I ask this question is because I heard that, as a rule, he did not take any disciples.
It's true that he did not take in students. He would answer anybody's question about the art, but it was up to that person to learn on his own. Nobody can claim to be his student. I simply follow him to be able to learn the art of physiognomy reading on my own. He treated everybody equally. He would share his knowledge if you showed interest and asked him to explain things. I consider myself very lucky when I was introduced to him by one of his closest friends. On the way to the cinema in Dachau, Saigon, he asked me whether I was interested in learning the art of physiognomy reading. I told him that I was having trouble learning it from my own readings, because they did not provide me with a methodological or systematic way to put this art into practice. Much like one cannot make a sentence just by learning vocabulary. I was then allowed to follow him for 9 years from 1965 until 1974 when he passed away. I have been continuing on this path using physiognomy reading to help friends and others, providing them with some understanding about what is happening in their lives in the hope that this can bring some comfort to them.
I am holding your book in my hands. It has finally been published after many years of work on it. I understand that the revenue from this publication is dedicated to charity organizations. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes, the first one is called Friends of the Blind. Up to now, the money that has come from the sale of this book has funded cataract operations for around 2,000 poor patients, transforming their lives by restoring their vision. The second organization is called the Association for the Protection of Women and children in Vietnam. The goal is to provide them with basic health care.
To support these two charity organizations, you can order the book on the Amazon.com website. Now let's talk about the contents of the book. Can you give us a brief summary of the book?
I can try. This book can be considered a complete book about the art of physiognomy reading. It is suitable for beginners as well as for advanced learners. It follows Mr. Ngo Hum Zin's principles, starting from the basics, then building up and expanding the knowledge dynamically over time. Whether you're seeking insights into your friends or into your own faith, this book will offer you a fresh perspective that can help you to live a life that you may have been looking for. The book is divided into 14 chapters, going from simpler to more complex concepts, with illustrations and examples to help the reader on their journey. This book is not novel-like, in that it cannot be read from cover to cover within a few hours. It requires the reader to mull over new words and concepts like countenance, voice, color, and form, and to develop a real understanding of the vocabulary and the principles behind the art. Indeed, the book Physiognomy, The Art of Reading People, is a thorough guide to the fundamentals. The topics include observing and interpreting a person's physical forms, the color of the different features, as well as his or her voice and countenance. The topics also include grouping the physiognomy features into sets, evaluating how a person's fate can be influenced by his or her family and co-workers, identifying more or less suitable home and workplace environment for a person, and generally applying physiognomy to the daily life of any individual who would like to contemplate these issues. The book also includes 40 detailed case studies to illustrate the practical uses of physiognomy. What matters most is that one needs to maintain great concentration within a tranquil mind to do the work.
Using your book and based on the drawings, will anyone be able to practice physiognomy reading?
There are more than 400 basic drawings in the book to accompany the written principles. If one puts one's mind to it, assimilates the true meaning of the basics, and applies the principle diligently, then one can even achieve an advanced level of the art using the book. The two main skills one has to learn and develop are observation skills and analytical skills. The book reverts ways to develop thorough, methodical, and accurate observation skills, because a mistake in this can lead to a grave error. The analysis of all inputs has to be strongly supported by the acquired knowledge in order to enable one to draw the right conclusions. The most important factor that is repeated over and over in this book is that while reading a person's physiognomy, it is very important for the physiognomist to have a calm heart and a concentrated mind, that he or she can provide an objective and accurate reading. One does not do the physiognomy reading for reasons like hatred, greed, or competitiveness, because a disturbed mind cannot see things clearly.
It seems that one cannot simply read a feature, like a person's nose or ear, for example. Rather, one has to use strong logical skills and a keenly accurate observation when reading. What does that really mean in practice? For example, how can we differentiate a real feature from what you call in the book a fake feature?
In the book, you will find two separate chapters to address this question. One deals with how to read each individual feature. Some important features by themselves allow us to make predictions about good or bad, long-lasting or temporary, success or failure. The second chapter analyzes features in terms of sets. A set is a group of relative features that consists of a master with one or more subordinates, similar to the concept of a king and the knights in his court. The subordinates can affect the master in a positive or negative way. A master that has all the required subordinates is said to have sufficient left and right hand supports. Either the master or the subordinates can be good or bad. All the required features in a set must be presented in order to cause certain events to happen. Putting this analysis into practice, the situation is considered favorable if the king has power over the knight, or in other words, the master has control over the subordinates. If this is reversed, the situation is considered antagonist to the person. The same rule applies to the concept of real versus fake, or to that of balance. When features are fake, or whether there is lack of balance, it is not worth mentioning. For example, a positive feature that is fake will lead to a positive outcome for the person. A light person with heavy voice has an overexposed countenance. Therefore, he or she is prone to calamities and can die prematurely if he or she also has a premature death feature. A heavy person with light voice has also a small amount of energy, and if this is coupled with a premature death feature, then he or she should not attempt risky ventures. It is said that when these people talk, their words seem to drop away as they barely come out of their mouth because they speak from the throat. If they were to speak from the belly, it would make the sound reverberate like that of a brass bell and would demonstrate a strong countenance. You can see that based on some basic knowledge, one needs to mobilize one's imagination to visualize and feel, and thereby master the analysis of the concept. If one seriously invests in learning the art, I believe one can attain around a 70% level of understanding within just 1 week, as several friends of mine did, having spent days and nights going through the book. I would recommend that one use this book more of a way to open the mind to a different kind of science, and as a reference book for contemplating on life, rather than focusing one's effort on trying to predict the future for oneself or others. I should note that one thing that this book keeps repeating over and over is the importance of one's heart, countenance, and destiny.
There are times when one intuitively feels that a person is wicked, evil, or kind-hearted. Can we say that this is a kind of physiognomy reading?
There are times when one intuitively feel that a person is wicked, evil, or kind-hearted. Can we say that this is a kind of physiognomy reading? Certainly. The art of physiognomy reading is a result of experiences collected and accumulated from generation to generation. Asian people use this art for different reasons, from choosing a friend or a spouse for your child, to selecting a business partner, or even the servant in the house. We also have sayings like, a wise person tends to have a strong dark colored pupil, a fatuous person to have a pupil color between lead and brass, or cross-eyed people are likely to be tricky or deceptive. Such association can be misleading. Even though these beliefs have been around from time and memorable, they should not be used as a basis for judging character. For instance, a small person cannot simply be seen as short, as these concepts are not the same. I have small friends who are real geniuses, honest, and highly successful. For example, parents often do not want their son to marry women with high cheekbones due to popular belief or fear that, if they do so, the son will suffer an early death. However, there are so many different variations and meaning to that feature. There are women with high cheekbones who play a critical role in aiding and bringing success for their husband and families in law. Therefore, one has to be careful when referring to those popular sayings.
In other words, we should avoid oversimplifying or overgeneralizing these concepts.
Let's take an example of a cross-eyed person who is having a conversation with two other people, one on his right, the other on his left. An honest one will move his face straight from one person to the other, while the tricky one will look down first before moving his eyes to the other person.
I'd like to bring up the subject of cosmetic surgery. When I was younger, my mother used to ask me to have my nose fixed because she was worried that I would not be successful in my life. I was so scared of scissors. Will a cosmetic surgery make a difference in your destiny?
The nose represents the career for a man, and wealth for both men and women. Suppose you had a protruding bone on your nose, which our popular beliefs attributes to difficulties in one's career. However, it is merely an aesthetic aspect. Whether you correct it or not does not matter because it will not affect your destiny. It is acceptable for one to have cosmetic surgery to look better without seriously affecting one's heart and mind, like correcting a nose so that it does not look bony. However, I have a friend who has surgery to change a round face into a square one, with a heightened nose, although the original nose was already perfect in physiognomy terms. Now, while Chinese physiognomists claim that one feature can bring fortune or fame for 10 years, Mr. Ngo Hengzin taught that one feature might not be good just by itself. It might even bring early death. According to Mr. Ngo Hengzin, one needs to look upon feature holistically, or in terms of a set, like a king who should have enough good knights. For that reason, a nose can only be seen as a positive feature if it is in harmony with the forehead, the cheek, and the chin. To have an aggressive plastic surgery on the nose that is already perfect is to ruin one's good fortune. Here's another example of the importance of a set. Suppose that a woman aged 50 to 60 decide to have cosmetic surgery to look 25 to 35. This kind of surgery would definitely affect her psyche. She will act much younger and feel more beautiful than her husband, who still looks and feels 60 years old. This will likely affect their relationship. The pseudo age gap will create an odd feelings for both. Since one's heart can determine one's karma, one can predict that there will be great disturbances and difficulties in the relationship that we cannot even start to envision.
The plastic surgeon only does what is being asked of him by his clients. He is probably powerless in terms of advising them against the procedure. There are so many women and so many Hollywood celebrities, including Michael Jackson, who have resorted to cosmetic surgery time after time but are still dissatisfied. Does that mean that the result is not always as expected?
The aging process can do wonders. A person might not have a good appearance at the age of 20, but an acceptable one at 30. A better look at 40 than a respectable one at 50, thanks to the balanced physiognomy features that have developed over time. That reflects the mystery of the possible evolution of one's destiny. Therefore, when a person has an aggressive cosmetic surgery at the age of 25, it can affect the whole system and destroy or upset the potential for positive changes that was predestined. For example, a person who overdoes plastic surgery on her chin when she is young may not, as she ages, have the room to accommodate changes in other features, resulting in an imbalance.
To your knowledge and with your physiognomy reading experience, what is the percentage of people who successfully improve their destiny through cosmetic surgery?
Suppose that people just want to have a surgery on the nose and or the eyes. I might advise them to go ahead, but keep it reasonable, unless we are talking about my sister or my wife.
How can one judge whether a surgery is reasonable or not?
One has to understand what level of beauty one can obtain and go about it in a meaningful way over time. For example, one can have a small plastic surgery at 20, another small one at 40, and then another one at 60. If one makes a complete change at a younger age, one would not have any chance to fix it when something goes wrong.
That means it is okay to have plastic surgery at the age of 60, right?
Certainly, one can do it at 60, even at 70, even at 80. The trick is not to overdo it, because it is not satisfactory. There will be no room for correction in the future.
We often hear you mention the heart and the countenance. Can you tell us more about the important role of the heart and countenance in your book?
One's heart plays a major role in one's destiny. A person who has a calm, peaceful, and kind heart will encounter more positive external factors. A person with a mind that is disturbed by greed, anger, and selfishness will encounter more negative happenings. One's countenance follows one's heart like a shadow. A peaceful heart brings a calm countenance, which will protect a person from harm's way, including from illnesses. A disturbed heart brings about a panic countenance, which can lead to accidents or illnesses. Therefore, when a physiognomist offers advice, it is utterly important to provide that advice carefully, so as not to affect the person's countenance for the above reasons. Physiognomy reading is all about helping a person and not about provoking anxiety. It does not matter whether the reading is perceived to be right or wrong. What is more important is to convey a positive thought that can provide an encouragement for a positive change.
Does that mean a kind-hearted person who does a lot of good deeds, who always cares about others, will mitigate their negative features?
Certainly. For example, a robber who wants to rob an elderly woman can just snatch her purse and run away. Or he can decide to kill her. Even if he gets arrested by the police in the first scenario, it does not lead to much of a change in his physiognomy, since he still has something good in his heart. However, in the second scenario, the decision to kill will put the imprint of a murderer on his physiognomy. That means one's physiognomy can change anytime, even within a matter of seconds, depending on the action dictated by one's heart. That is why any good feature can be subjected to change in no time.
Many of us are wondering why one would seek a reading and aspire to change things when one's fate is predetermined.
Wing Tzu once said, "Ever since the beginning of time, man's will has quite often triumphed over destiny." Mr. Ngô Hung Jin believed that nothing was ever immutable. In other words, one's physiognomy is subjected to change by one's heart and mind, which are not static at all. In fact, physiognomy varies with circumstances at different levels of intensity. Nobody can ever be told by a physiognomist, "You will die tomorrow," because in the next 24 hours, it is possible for that person to do things that can either precipitate his or her death or reverse the whole situation and allow the person to live for another 10 to 20 years. In an ancient story, the hair of a very famous scholar named Wu Zizhu turned completely white overnight while he was in prison, due to excessive worrying and thinking. That is an example of how a disturbed or frightened mind can dictate a radical change in one's physiognomy, in this instance from black to white hair. There is no science that allows one to predict one's future precisely, since it depends on one's heart and mind, which are never static. That is why there is no set or immutable destiny. Buddhism compares the human mind to a monkey that jumps all over the place. Indeed, one can go further and say that it is not one's physiognomy features, but rather is one's heart and mind that dictate one's success or failures, happiness or suffering, life or death.
I guess we can look at the US presidents. For example, not long after they moved into the White House, Presidents Bush, Clinton, and Obama all got white hair and wrinkled faces due to the stressful work and heavy responsibilities. But turning to ourselves, can you tell us how we can use the book to apply physiognomy readings in real life?
The book shows you how to make observations so as to choose a friend, a partner, or a master. One may have a good partner to start with, but he or she may become an enemy. Therefore, careful observation is important. One can use physiognomy reading to achieve tranquility in one's life. For example, if we know a person is evil, then instead of bad-mouthing him, one can keep one's distance from that person. In the same vein, knowing that a person is kind-hearted, one should be ready to forgive if he or she makes a mistake, so as not to lose a valuable friendship. My recommendation is to learn physiognomy reading as a tool to live a peaceful life. After all, a life of wealth and fame is not rewarding enough without peace of mind.
You mentioned earlier that you know of friends who have read your book over and over. Can you tell us how long it takes for one to be able to practice physiognomy after reading the book without making mistakes?
There are ways of developing observation skills and analytical skills. For observation, one has to learn to collect data, whereas for analysis, one has to learn to put the data together to reach a conclusion. There are also certain physiognomy laws. Looking only at separate features is not good enough. One has to incorporate the laws to come to a conclusion, just like one cannot make a sentence using only words without syntax or grammar. Mr. Ngô Hồng Diên was called Divine Master or Saint, which he did not accept because to him, a physiognomy reading was just the application of all those laws in a clever way.
You don't do physiognomy reading for money?
I enjoy doing it as a means of sharing the knowledge of the remarkable art with friends or family, not to seek money or favors, since there is nothing grandiose about it.
Do you include any anecdotes in this book?
There are 40 anecdotes from Mr. Ngô Hồng Dien's reading that I have collected from friends to provide typical examples for the reader to learn from. I also included 10 other anecdotes from my 45 years of practicing physiognomy readings. These anecdotes are not designed to prove anything, but rather to make the book more interesting.
It seems that you also include pictures of well-known people like President Obama, Stalin, and others as illustrations.
Yes, I use pictures of people to illustrate special features. After completing the first draft, I spent the next 2 years editing it. I removed many similar examples to make the content more concise. I have kept the case of Stalin because he killed millions of Russians and Poles. His pressed face with plywood-like skin made him a cold-blooded killer. I do mention President Obama, not because he has special features, but rather to highlight the features of his wife, which looks like an upside-down bell. This physiognomy indicates a wife who can bring lots of benefits to her husband. The upper part of President Obama's ears are very thin, which signals a calamity if he is in a position of high power. But thanks to his wife's physiognomy, this risk is reduced by 75%.
It sounds like one's physiognomy can affect another person's life and not just one's own.
A husband's physiognomy has a 100% impact on the wife's life. On the other hand, the wife's physiognomy has 1,000% impact on the husband's life. There's a saying, no man can achieve great success without a good wife behind him.
That explains the great importance of a good marriage.
Without question, it is firmly stated in Ngô Hồng Dien's physiognomy that a man cannot have a great achievement without the backing of a woman.
As an example, can you tell us about President Kennedy and his First Lady? What made him die young?
He had the physiognomy of a world hero, but did not have all the needed features to help him peak in his success, based on his deficient forehead. Besides, his Hoang zone was narrow and beveled. Therefore, he wouldn't have needed a special person with complementary features to allow him to succeed. The First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, was thin and therefore unable to complement her husband's deficient Hoang Trong. However, her physiognomy was precious and noble, and her forehead was flat. This allowed her to benefit from winning before losing. Overall, though, her physiognomy renders the negative features of the president worse. Vice President Johnson had the necessary features to be a partner who could help President Kennedy to achieve great success. However, he also had the features of a usurper, with his very well-developed forehead that resembles a sky dome and his strong countenance that was comparable to an iron mountain. Moreover, his Hoang Trong was full and spacious, fitting with the physiognomy of a person who takes everything for himself and does not care about sharing at all. Therefore, in times of great success, the host-guest position would be reversed. The president's physiognomy was in the end overpowered by his vice presidents.
Let's talk about the case of Princess Diana.
Mr. Lee Van, the former chief of Voice of America's Vietnamese programming, wrote the introduction for this book, and he mentioned Princess Diana. I had a chance to look at her physiognomy at a party at Mr. Lee Van's house when we were all watching her wedding on television. I predicted that she would not become queen. To be able to come to such a certain and fast conclusion, a physiognomist has to focus mainly on the other person's countenance and not on the features. She did not have the needed countenance. Earlier, I also had a chance to look at pictures of Prince Charles in Newsweek's magazine when he was kneeling at his investiture ceremony. His ignoble countenance would not allow him to become king. Since both of them did not have the necessary countenance to be king and queen, I was pretty certain in my prediction. In the book, I explained that learning how to read a person's countenance is very beneficial. When someone's countenance gets disturbed, he or she has to be very prudent in planning a risky venture. We can apply this principle to other people. For example, when a child comes home all exhausted and with a panicked countenance, parents have to try to figure out the reason so as to provide the child with timely and appropriate help and support. If they ignore it, they will have to pay a higher price later. Another example, a person's countenance can be seen as extremely deficient when he involuntarily drops his keys, spills water from his cup, or sits on an unsteady chair, and he will be prone to a fatal accident or illness. In fact, one's countenance acts like protective armor and will fail to do so if it becomes deficient. I will recommend that the reader invest in learning how to read the countenance. Your lifelong devotion to learning and studying the art of physiognomy has been generously invested in this valuable book, and that is very much appreciated. To sum up, I would like to invite you to address to our audience, in particular, if you have any comments on how to use this book so as to have a new way of looking at people and interpreting life. Thank you for the interview. This book is primarily to show my gratitude to my master. I consider myself very lucky indeed to have studied under him. What he taught me was unique and cannot be found anywhere else. I would like to ask any reader who can prove me otherwise to correct me. Physiognomy, the art of reading people, is completely based on Vietnamese values and culture, but I believe it is applicable universally. My goal is to lay down the foundation blocks for the Vietnamese art of physiognomy reading, on which the reader can build and further develop this worldwide skill. I also wish to provide the reader with more precise views on features and thereby lay to rest many of our popular sayings that are too generalized to be of much value and can lead to misjudgment and prejudice against people with certain features. For example, cross-eyed or short stature. I would be extremely happy if the above wishes are realized, and I welcome any helpful feedback or input from the reader because I consider this book as a collective property.
Thank you, Professor Jun, for being so generous with your time for this interview.
I would like to thank you all for watching, and in particular, I wish to thank you, Mr. Thuy, for your thoughtful questions. I wish you well.